Welcome to the recorded presentation on the Elm-Beacon Connector concept design. In this video, we'll share the latest updates on the Elm-Beacon Connector project, and to see more details, please check out our community open house posters available on the project webpage. So in our project, we are aiming to implement a safer design for Elm Street between Russell Street to Somerville Avenue between the city line to Elm Street, Beacon Street between Somerville Avenue to Oxford Street, and Mawson Street as part of the Somerville Bicycle Network Plan and Safe Streets Ordinance. So in this presentation, we'll provide an overview of the project, share the pre-concept design community feedback we heard about transportation safety concerns and priorities for the area, describe the traffic modeling and analysis we conducted, and share details about the concept design. With this presentation, we aim to provide you with details to help understand the proposed changes in preparation to providing feedback to our team. Please share your feedback with us either by attending our upcoming virtual office hour, coming by our street outreach pop-up, completing our feedback survey, or sending us a written comment to transportation@somervillema.gov. All these details on how to engage are available at www.somervillema.gov/elmbeacon. So we are excited to share with you over the course of this video why are we doing the Elm-Beacon Connector? What did we hear in community feedback? What tools can we use in quick build projects to improve safety? What is in the proposed design? And what's next, and how can you engage? So I'll dive first right into why are we doing the Elm-Beacon Connector? Before I talk about some of those details, I just want to share that this project is being led by the Mobility Division, which is a part of the city's Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development, also known as OSPCD. So my name is Kate White. I'm a transportation planner, and I'm working with Adam Polinsky, senior planner, and Lillian Worth, transportation planner, on this project. And anytime, you can always reach us at transportation@somervillema.gov. Although mobility is at the helm of this project, we always work closely with our city departments. This includes parking, engineering, Department of Public Works, and the fire department whenever we're proposing changes to our streetscapes. And for this particular project, because it's on the city line, we're also in close coordination with our team members at the City of Cambridge. So I want to share a bit of background and values and plans that shape our work. For all projects, we start first and foremost with the goal of keeping people safe on our streets and then creating more sustainable options for people to get around the city. We have 5 main plans that guide our work. This includes the Somerville's Comprehensive Plan, Summer Vision 2040, which sets the city's broad sets the city's broad values and goals for community-oriented planning. The Climate Forward Plan, which ensures that our projects also supports the city's mission to protect our environment. The Americans with Disabilities Act's transition plan helps us make our streets more accessible to everyone. And we are actually in the process of updating this transition plan, and we anticipate a new version to be available soon. We also have our bicycle network plan, which is thinking through ways to ensure that people can safely and comfortably bike throughout our city, and our Vision Zero action plan, which is our work to prevent death and serious injury on our streets. We have 2 ordinances that underscore all these commitments. The first is the Complete Streets Ordinance, which was put in place in 2014, which broadly stipulates that streets should be designed for all modes of travel and all ages and abilities. And the Safe Streets Ordinance passed in 2024 set specific targets and timelines for implementing street safety projects, including protected bike lanes from the Bike Network Plan, accessible parking spaces, and pedestrian transit improvements. So why specifically here? Next, I'll talk about some of the factors that went into our decision to making safety improvements in this specific area of the city. This area has been identified as particularly dangerous for people walking, rolling, and biking. Beacon, Elm, and Somerville Ave are all considered high crash streets, and in particular, Elm for vulnerable road users. So this means that we have a higher proportion of reported crashes involving a person walking, rolling, or biking. And there are 3 intersections in the project area that are also high crash spots. All of the streets in our project area are part of the Somerville Bicycle Network Plan, with Elm, Beacon, and Somerville Ave planned for protected bike lanes in both directions, and Mawson Street set to become a low-traffic neighborway. Elm and Beacon and Somerville Ave are also all part of the Priority Network, which is the city's commitment to complete kind of the backbone of the Bicycle Network Plan by 2030. The Safe Streets Ordinance passed by the City Council obligates us to install no less than 3 miles per year of new protected bike lane. And we really anticipate that when the Elm-Beacon connector is completed, we'll provide almost 2 miles of new protected bike lane. So it is a very high impact project in a key area of our network. So I want to dig a little bit into what did we hear in community feedback. Um, did a lot of community engagement prior to developing the concept design. So I'm going to share how that feedback, and I'm going to share a little bit about that feedback, and then we'll get into later how it informed the design. So from September 4th to October 28th of 2024, we worked to engage community members in this first phase of the project. During this phase, we aim to promote awareness about the Quick Build project, including both the opportunities and limitations in a non-construction project, hear insight into how the streets in the project are used, learn about community members' safety concerns, and gather feedback on ways to make it safer and more comfortable for all users, especially the most vulnerable, people walking, rolling, and biking. We, this is a primarily protected bike facilities project, but we also aim to learn about critical crosswalks to prioritize with additional quick build improvements. We also wanted to hear about bus rider experience, gather ideas for parking regulation modifications to mitigate the impact of parking removal, and better understand experiences moving through all the intersections for all users. We actually put all of this information together in one report called the Pre-Concept Design Community Engagement Report that describes in detail how we work to engage community members and what we learned. So we really encourage anyone that's interested to check this out. It's available on the project website. Just a brief overview of kind of what we did is we launched the project by broadcasting the project and both the launch of the project and hosting a virtual community meeting, which we detailed in our Mobility Division newsletter, shared in flyers at community events like the Mayor's Senior Picnic, the Gilman Square Arts Festival. We flyered over 400 homes in the project area and sent out emails through the city's city alert system, kind of in a large project, in the kind of larger project area. We hosted this virtual community meeting in late September and followed this with 2 outreach pop-ups, one at a major intersection, this is Beacon Street and Somerville Ave, and one at school arrival right outside the Kennedy School to spread the word about the project and collect community member feedback on safety concerns and ideas. At the same time, we facilitated an online feedback survey and public input map that logged email comments that we received. We also visited small businesses in early October to talk through their specific delivery needs and gather ideas on parking regulation modifications. We wrapped all these outreach efforts out with one more community event on the Summer Streets Monster Mash at the end of October. Overall, we estimate that we connected with over 722 people in these efforts. Jumping into some of the feedback, we wanted to share some of the highlights of the feedback that we heard. But again, if you're really interested, please go check out our community engagement report. So regarding biking, we heard enthusiastic support for protected bike lanes in the area. Many share that they rely on Elm Street, Somerville Ave, and Beacon Street to get to school, daycares, jobs, local businesses, and their homes. Some share their stories of either being hit or nearly being hit traveling on Elm Street and wish for separation from motor vehicles. Some share their concern about the current pavement quality and requested repaving, and many describe their concerns about feeling unsafe, especially traveling through our intersections and making lefts in particular. We had a lot of comments around traffic. Some shared their concerns about congestion, potentially increasing if Mawson Street is no longer a southbound motor vehicle connection. Some who drive or bike requested making traffic signal timings and phasing adjustments to mitigate congestion and provide dedicated signals for bikes. Regarding transit, bus riders shared about unpleasant bus waiting experiences due to lack of shade coverage, shelters, or benches, especially for the Route 83 on Somerville Avenue and Route 87 across from the Porter Square Shopping Center. Some shared their satisfaction with current service and how they don't experience a lot of bus delay. And then we heard a lot of comments around crossings and crosswalks. People shared their frustration with people driving, not yielding or stopping for people using the crosswalk. We heard requests for more signage and pavement markings to make the crossings more visible. We heard support for clear corners to increase visibility at crossings for both people using crosswalk and people driving. We'll get into a little bit more about what clear corners means later on in the presentation. We kind of have bucketed some feedback under what we called unsafe behaviors, and these are kind of a conglomeration of different comments that we heard. Many share their concerns about speeding on Elm Street, especially near the school and at many of the unsignalized crosswalks. Many described their concerns about red light running causing unsafe conditions for all users, but especially pedestrians. Some described their experiences crossing across the slip lane at Somerville Ave and feeling that vehicles rarely stop at that stop sign. And many shared with us they witnessed cut-through movements in the parking lot at 715 Somerville Avenue. This is mainly for vehicles who want to avoid the signalized intersection, and this creates unexpected conflicts for people walking, wheeling, and biking kind of past those curb cuts. Regarding parking, some shared concern about parking removal on Elm Street to make space for protected bike lanes. Some were worried about the impacts of side street curb use and longer parking search times. We heard requests for more school arrival and dismissal dedicated space to help manage the curb demand. Some shared the need for more short-term parking, like meters or loading zones to accommodate small business operations. And then I want to specifically highlight in our survey, when we asked folks how concerned are you about the following in the project area, some of the most selected were that it feels unsafe biking, there are a high number of vehicles speeding, and it feels unsafe when crossing the street. Another kind of survey highlight we wanted to show were just kind of which intersections do people feel the most unsafe at, and overwhelmingly over 50% selected both the Beacon Street at Somerville Avenue intersection and the Elm Street at Beach Street as one of their most unsafe or uncomfortable. So diving into some specific intersection comments, wanted to highlight some we heard at Elm Street at Beach and Willow Avenue. We heard about long crosswalks where people crossing felt that vehicles often don't yield or stop for them. We also heard about people taking fast turns from Beach Street to Willow or speeding down Elm Street. At the intersection of Elm like the intersections from Elm, including Cherry Street to White Street and Hancock Street, we heard about confusion among all users traveling outside the shopping center due to the diagonal crosswalks, frequent turns in and out of the shopping center parking lot, driveways, and traffic um, between Hancock Street and White Street. We heard the desire to increase visibility and priority for people using the crosswalks, especially at Cherry Street, which is frequently used by Kennedy School students. At Elm Street, at Porter Street, and Linden Avenue, community members described their speeding and low rates of yielding at the crossings concerns. Some people who bike shared about the danger of being right hooked at Linden Avenue. We also heard about bus rider discomfort waiting at bus stops nearby. In particular, the South Side bus stop on Elm Street at Porter Street sits between two driveways. I'm focusing on the two larger signalized intersections that we heard the most about, but in the report we collected feedback around all, so feel free to check those out. But we heard the most about these next two. At Somerville Avenue, Beacon Street, and Mossland, some people who bike shared that taking a left onto Somerville Avenue from Mossland Street feels dangerous because cars often run the light on Somerville Avenue moving eastbound. Some described how they feel unsafe while biking approaching the intersection from Beacon Street because they get dropped out of the protected facility on Beacon. Some people who drive asked if traffic signal timing could be variable to be more effective at managing traffic, encouraging better compliance. And many different types of users described their concern about people traveling on red lights, especially during the pedestrian phase. At the intersection of Elm Street at Somerville Ave, we heard concerns about increased congestion that could exacerbate existing safety issues. Some share that people driving sometimes get confused when they are taking a left onto Elm from eastbound Somerville Avenue and turn to the left of the island or into the oncoming traffic lane. Some describe how it feels like there are no options to take a left from Somerville Avenue to Elm Street on a bike without feeling incredibly vulnerable and unsafe. And many share that they see the frequent vehicle cut through between Somerville Ave and Elm Street through that same Starbucks parking lot. Many people who walk and bike described how they feel people driving rarely stop at the stop sign in the westbound Somerville Ave slip lane. So that's kind of just a highlight of what we heard in community feedback. I want to dig into a little bit of some of the tools we can use in quick build projects to improve safety. So what's included in this quick build project? We can install protected bike lanes, make changes to parking regulations, narrow travel lanes, make traffic signal and street network changes, improve crosswalk visibility, and consider consolidating or relocating bus stops. What we aren't able to do is repave the street or repour sidewalks. We won't be installing raised crosswalks or new crosswalks. We won't be doing any utility, lighting, or stormwater work. Because again, we're not able to do any major construction. We'll only be able to use quick build improvements. So primarily your paint and signs and traffic signal improvements. And the reason why we're doing a quick build project is none of the streets within the project area are in the city's capital investment plan or the 5-year repaving plan. That leaves quick build lines and science projects the only option for delivering street improvements here in the next 5 years. This type of project also allows us to implement the project in a much faster and less impactful way than standard construction, and it also allows us to be more flexible down the line if additional changes need to be made. So diving into what are some of these tools, we'll start off with protected bike lanes. Um, we aim, protected bike lanes are dedicated space for people on bikes that are physically separated from motor vehicles. So in quick build projects, we install plastic flex posts. These are those large vertical posts. You can see some examples of Grand Union Boulevard to provide that vertical separation and prevent illegal parking on the protected bike lane. Protected bike lanes are important elements of safe streets because they increase comfort and access for people of all ages and abilities, reduce crash and injury risks, eliminate the threat of dooring. So that's when a driver opens a door out onto someone who is biking, reduce potential conflicts between vehicles and people biking, and encourage slower traffic speeds by visually narrowing the street. Another tool is painting clear corners. We kind of have a visual describing some of this, but when parked vehicles near crosswalks um, parked so close to the crosswalk, they can block the views for people driving and people crossing the street. So by restricting parking ahead of crosswalks, we increase the visibility for all people using the roadway and reduce the likelihood of crashes. This also often makes it easier for first responders and trash trucks to turn more easily because they're not trying to kind of inch around vehicles that are so close up to the intersection. Local, state, and federal laws actually prohibit parking between 20 feet ahead of a crosswalk or 30 feet ahead of a signalized intersection. So the city has been working hard to bring our streets into compliance by implementing pavement markings and sometimes signage and flex posts to communicate this restriction. We've primarily focused on streets with our higher crash rates, or we're already reconstructing or redesigning the street, and some of those streets are Broadway and Washington Street. And lastly, another tool in our toolkit is installing centerline hardening at critical crosswalks, where we can help encourage vehicles to slow down without impacting necessary fire truck turns. By placing flex posts in the center line approaching an unsignalized crosswalk, we can encourage motor vehicles to not take shallow and fast left turns. Yellow flex posts ahead of the crosswalk can also draw more attention and increase visibility of the crosswalk ahead. So with that, I'll hand it over to Adam Polinsky, who'll walk us through what is in the proposed design.
Thanks, Kate. All right, so now that we have talked through a lot of the context for this project and the feedback that we heard in our first round of engagement, we want to show you what we have come up with and what we are proposing in the design for this project. So I'm going to go section by section here, and we will start at the western end of the project corridor on Elm Street between Russell Street and Elston Street. Today, there's a travel lane in each direction and parking on both sides of the street. The concept design proposes a travel lane in each direction, so that will stay the same, but we'll be adding protected bike lanes in each direction, and there will be parking on one side of the street. Parking would be maintained on the north side of the street, west of Wyndham Street, and on the south side of the street, east of Wyndham Street. 4 new parking spaces are also proposed to be added on the west side of Cutter Ave between Elm and Summer Street, as well as 8 new parking spaces on the west side of Russell between Orchard and Elm. So those are brand new parking spaces that don't exist today. The bus stops on Elm Street at Russell and Cutter are proposed to stay in the same location as they are today. We also plan to make upgrades to signal equipment and adjust the timing of the traffic lights at the intersection of Elm and Russell, as you can see in purple on the diagram here. And we do not plan to fundamentally change the way those signals work at this time, but will instead focus on things like making sure each street has enough green time or walk time. Before we move to the next section of the proposal, I did just want to stop quickly to give everyone a real-world example of what Elm Street could look like at the end of this project. So we do have an example of what Elm Street most likely will look like, or a very similar example on Holland Street, where we installed protected bike lanes in 2022. And it has very similar widths to most of Elm Street. So it's a pretty good example of kind of, what allows you to envision what Elm Street will look like when this project is all said and done. So you can see that the flex posts are there to separate the bike lanes in both directions, and one side of the street has parking next to the bike lane. We won't be doing any repaving as part of this project, unlike on Holland, but otherwise there are a lot of similarities to potential future condition in Elm. And so it's a good example to kind of visualize what that'll look like. So we'll keep moving. Next, we will tackle the section of Elm between Elston and Burnside. So today, this section of Elm gets wider as you approach Beach Street, as I'm sure anyone who drives, walks, bikes, or buses through the area is familiar with. There is currently parking on both sides of the street and a travel lane in each direction, one eastbound, one westbound. In the westbound direction, there's also a left turn lane if you're trying to turn off of Elm onto Beach Street. Um, and that's generally the setup today. The concept design proposes a travel lane in each direction, so that will not change. You'll still continue to be able to drive eastbound and westbound, and that is going to be the case throughout the entire project area. And we will also be adding protected bike lanes in each direction. Between Elston and St. James Ave, parking can be maintained on both sides of the street. East of St. James Ave, however, parking is proposed only on one side of the street. We do not have width to have maintained it on both sides. A lane for left turns off of Elm onto both Beach and Willow is also proposed, as you can see sort of in the very middle of the diagram. Um, in the eastbound stops on Elm at Beach are proposed to be split. The eastbound stop on Elm at Beach is proposed to be split into two stops, one around the corner on Beach itself, and one a little bit further down Elm, closer to Saginaw Ave. The flex posts that are currently on the center lines at the crosswalk across Elm at Beach and across Elm at Willow are proposed to stay, although likely in a slightly different configuration to accommodate the design changes that we're proposing. We've also been working closely with staff in the city of Cambridge, who will be removing the concrete medians on Beach Street to allow us to tee off this intersection and kind of have it come in at a 90-degree angle with Elm. That will create new pedestrian space shown in tan here and improve the experience for people using the crosswalk across Beach in a pretty significant way. Now we'll move on to the section of Elm between Burnside and the eastern end of Holyoke Road. So today, this section of Elm has parking on both sides and a travel lane in each direction, similar to the other sections. There are also some curb extensions, however, near the Porter Square Shopping Center. That does make this section a little bit different than the rest of Elm. The proposed design does maintain the travel lane in each direction and adds protected bike lanes in each direction. Parking is maintained on one side of the street. In this case, it is the north side as well, primarily because of the Kennedy School and allowing pickup and drop-off access to continue there. The bus stops at Hancock are both proposed to stay in the same location as they are today. We are also proposing flex posts on the center line of the roadway at the crosswalk across Elm at White Street. And we will also be modifying the design of the contraflow bike lane on Hancock Street at the entrance here. So it will still be a short little bike lane that allows folks to kind of go in the opposite direction of travel, but it is going to be updated to match our newer design standards for that type of treatment. We will also be relocating the Blue Bike Station from just east of White Street here all the way over to the other side of the Porter Square Shopping Center Plaza driveways opposite Burnside Ave, roughly. So we do not have room over here, and we'll be relocating it to the closest possible open space, which is opposite Burnside. All right, let's continue to work our way down Elm. Now we're at the section Holyoke. The eastern side of Holyoke is just off the screen here on the left. And then we're going all the way down to Porter Street. Um, Again, today, one travel lane in each direction, parking on both sides. This section does have a bike lane in one direction, heading sort of westbound or northbound, depending on how you're orienting yourself. Um, and so that piece is a little bit different than the rest of Elm Street. So there is already a bike lane in one direction there. The proposed design maintains the travel lanes and adds protected bike lanes in each direction and parking is removed on one side to be able to fit those bike lanes and is maintained on the north or the east side of the street. The bus stops at Cedar and Mossland are proposed to stay in the same location, as is the eastbound stop at Porter Street. The westbound stop is proposed to shift slightly, just sort of off the edge of the screen here to the other side of Porter Street, which we are not proposing parking in that section that is just off the page here, and moving that stop will generally give similar bus experience, but does allow us to maintain a little bit more parking on that side of the street. We are proposing to add flex posts on the center line of the crosswalk across Elm at Porter, as seen here in orange. And you can also see that we are proposing to make a pretty significant change to Mossland Street, which will effectively make it a dead end for any drivers that would want to come from Elm or across Cedar. That will no longer be possible. And we have a proposal that we will talk about in more detail in a couple slides. Moving on to the intersection of Somerville Ave at Elm Street, also known as Wilson Square. Today there is a right and left turn lane, perhaps a little bit informally as on Elm Street as you approach this intersection. There is a single lane for each direction of travel as you approach this intersection on Somerville Ave itself, and there's a slip lane for westbound Somerville Ave traffic. So it's kind of as you're coming like out of Union Square and want to get up to onto Elm, this is what we call a slip lane, with a few parking spaces right here, kind of by the Craigie Street intersection. Um, Somerville Ave also has what we call unprotected bike lanes in each direction. So parking is along the curb. The bike lanes are next to the parking, sort of sandwiched between the parking and the travel lanes. And our proposal will upgrade those unprotected bike lanes to protected bike lanes. Um, we will also be maintaining parking on both sides of the street on Somerville Ave. So Somerville Ave is a little bit wider than most of Elm. And so we do have enough width to maintain the travel lanes, add the protected bike lanes, and keep parking on both sides for the majority of this stretch. That does change as you get closer to the intersection of Beacon and Mossland, because we do want to add a dedicated turn lane. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Um, the only change that any vehicles will experience at this intersection itself, other than the addition of the protected bike lanes, is right now someone heading westbound on Somerville Ave could take a right, sort of from the main signalized portion of the intersection onto Elm, or they could use the slip lane. We are trying to reclaim as much space as possible for pedestrians and cyclists at this intersection, and also keep traffic flowing and making sure everyone can get through as quickly as possible. And so one thing that we're doing to make sure that that can happen is to not allow a right turn from either of these. So there, you will not be able to turn right anymore from Somerville Ave from the intersection itself. You will have to use the slip lane. And we've crunched some numbers and reviewed some video and found that the overall majority of people, over 90%, already do that. And this is just going to formalize this, and it will sort of allow this intersection to function a little bit more smoothly as a result. We do also have a pretty fundamental signal proposal planned for this intersection, and we will get into that in more detail in a few slides. Did also want to mention that we will be relocating the bus stop pair that is currently at this outside of the 715 Somerville Ave Starbucks, laundromat lot. So those will be going from closer to Elm Street on Somerville Ave, and we'll be heading westwards closer to Mossland Street and Beacon Street. So you can see one, the eastbound one is within view here. The westbound one is actually off the page a little bit. One thing we heard a lot from folks was that They were worried about cut through in this parking lot, as Kate mentioned earlier in the presentation. We did talk to the property owner here, and they're aware of the issue and aware that it could be exacerbated through our project. And so they do intend to install speed bumps to reduce the likelihood of folks wanting to cut through there. We're also hoping that our signal timing proposal will kind of help keep traffic moving as much as possible through this intersection and also reduce the desire for someone to simply cut through here without parking and visiting these businesses. Last thing I want to mention on this slide is that we do have new on-street parking spaces proposed as well that do not exist today. So as everyone's aware at this point, we are proposing to remove parking on a good chunk of Elm Street on one side to make room for the protected bike lanes. But where we do have opportunities to add new parking that doesn't exist today, we have highlighted in this plan. And currently there's no parking on these two little short blocks between these driveways of Somerville Ave. And so that will be brand new parking. All right, continuing our way down Somerville Ave to the intersection of Somerville at Beacon. You can also see Mossland and all the way up to the city line on the left side of the page here. Today, there's a travel lane in each direction on Somerville Ave, plus there are also turn lanes onto Beacon Street. There's a left turn in the westbound direction, and there's a right turn in the eastbound direction. There are currently unprotected bike lanes in both directions, and there is no on-street parking on this section of Somerville Ave today. So we're proposing to maintain the travel lanes in each direction and the turn lanes approaching Beacon Street. We are also proposing to add protected bike lanes like through the rest of the project corridor in both directions and add parking to one side of the street. So all of the parking that you can see on Somerville Ave here will be new. You can also see that we're proposing to add some new parking to a block of Mawson Street that doesn't have it today currently. Uh, we're proposing to maintain the two turn lanes on Beacon approaching Somerville Ave. Um, and we're also proposing to build protected bike lanes in both directions on Beacon itself to connect it to the protected bike lanes that exist east of Oxford Street all the way down to the city line. The proposed design does not include any on-street parking for this stretch of Beacon Street in order to provide the width needed for the protected bike lanes and to maintain those two turn lanes as you approach Somerville Ave. We are also proposing a fundamental change in the traffic signal setup to accommodate the potential um, pattern change resulting from the dead end of Mossland Street. And we'll talk through the details of those changes further in a bit. The bus stops on Somerville Ave near Beacon Terrace are proposed to shift closer to Beacon and Mossland. And so essentially we'll be taking the stop pair here that you can see here and the two I talked about on the last slide. And those will be combined into one stop between Beacon and Mossland and one stop a little bit east of Beacon. And lastly, just want to mention that we are also proposing center line hardening with flex post for the crosswalk across Beacon and Oxford. All right, and then the final piece of the design proposal is Mossland Street. So Mossland Street is designated as a neighborway on the bicycle network plan, and we are proposing to make that a reality as part of the Elm-Beacon Connector project. A neighborway, for those who may not know, is a street that is characterized by low volumes and speeds, as well as two-way travel for people on bikes, even if the street is one-way for cars. Excuse me. The goal of the neighborway is for the street to be quiet enough for people of all ages and abilities to bikely safe in the middle of the street. Examples of existing neighborways in Somerville, because we already have a few of these, include Hancock Street in Spring Hill and Glen Street in East Somerville. So the nice part about a neighborway is that most of Mossland Street will not have to change. It can remain primarily a one-lane street with parking on both sides. However, the main problem with just calling it a neighborhood today is that traffic volumes are currently too high for it to be considered a low stress route. To reduce traffic to a level that's comfortable for people to bike in the middle of the street, we are proposing to dead end Mossland at Elm Street. The latest design can be seen in the rendering to the right, which will allow for full two-way access for fire trucks, cyclists, and pedestrians at both ends of the street. It will also be two-way for cars, but all access to and from Mossland Street will happen at Somerville Ave. Um, We did think through what it would look like if we were to dead end the other side of Mossland Street, but ultimately went with the Elm Street side because the street is wider here and allows more room for folks to maneuver if they get to the end of the street and allow it to act a little bit more like a cul-de-sac. So now that we've given an overview of the plan, let's talk about the potential traffic impacts of the change to Mossland and what we intend to do about it. All right, so as noted earlier in the presentation, we're proposing to close Mossland to through traffic. We recognize that this will mean that traffic's going to have to go somewhere else, so we've done a lot of work to understand what we believe that impact will be. We analyze traffic data from a variety of sources and then use that data to model predicted traffic flows. Based on that modeling, we are then able to make recommendations for how we can ensure that traffic continues to move as efficiently as possible throughout the neighborhood. We'll give an overview of that analysis and those recommendations here, but be sure to check out the full report on our project page if you're interested in digging into all of the details. So what does traffic in this area look like today? Um, we started this process by figuring out existing traffic volumes for all of the streets within or directly adjacent to the project area. This map shows the estimated motor vehicle traffic on an average weekday for each direction of travel on each of these street segments. The darker colors represent more traffic, so you'll notice that the busiest streets in the area are Mass Ave, which is almost black, and Somerville Ave east of Elm, which is a very dark purple. You'll also notice that Elm Street east of Mossland and Somerville Ave between Mossland and Elm currently have lower volumes than at other places along either of those streets. And that will actually end up working to our advantage as we get further into this analysis. After collecting our baseline traffic data, we use traffic modeling software to better understand how people use Mossland Street in particular, because those are the trips that are going to change, right? So we found that there are about 2,700 trips on an average day that use Mossland. That does exclude any trips that start or end on Mossland itself, because the people that live there are going to need to get back there. So we're just talking about people that are coming from somewhere else and using Mossland to get somewhere else. So of those trips, of those drivers, over 50% are coming from Cedar Street, almost 1,600 cars a day on average, and a little over 40% are coming from Elm. Very, very few are coming from east of the Mossland Cedar Elm intersection or south, depending on how you want to look at it. The vast majority are coming from either of these legs. So as we dug into this analysis, we realized that a solid chunk of these trips, maybe between 10 and 15%, are starting in the neighborhood that is that sort of is in the middle of Davis Square, Ball Square, and the Spring Hill neighborhoods. But there is also a good chunk that comes from areas either further north or west as well. So it's a bit of a smattering. Um, Once those people get to Mossland, we found that a little over 40% continue down Oxford Street, while a little under 40% continue down Beacon Street. So one of these two streets are far and away, the most popular destinations of people that use Mossland. Very, very few people are taking a right off of Mossland. Almost everyone takes a left and then takes a right onto Beacon Street. Common destinations, once they get to these streets, include Harvard Square and Inman Square, but we do find a lot of traffic similar to where people are starting. They continue even further east or further south. And so there is a fairly wide net that is being cast in terms of the types of trips that are being generated and where people use Mawson Street, how they use it. So if we close Mossam Street to through traffic, where do we think that traffic is going to go? The key question that we want to answer was, if we shut off access to Mossland at one end, what's going to happen? Learning that 80% of people that drive down Mossland are headed for either Beacon or Oxford turned out to be a critical finding, because the closest alternatives to either of those streets are Mass Ave and Somerville Ave. Since those are both streets that are already a lot busier, generally more congested, and have more traffic lights than either Beacon or Oxford, we realized that it was going to be most likely that most drivers will try to find the shortest possible path to get back to Beacon or Oxford Street and continue down those, as opposed to finding new routes altogether and trying to go further outside of this area. Um, that shortest path is down to the intersection of Elm Street at Somerville Ave, back up Somerville Ave to Beacon, and then continuing on their way from there. Um, As a result, we believe that the area that's going to be most fundamentally impacted by the change to Mossland is highlighted in orange on the map here. And that's where we focused our potential solutions, which I'll get into more detail in a minute. It's important to note that we based our decisions on a worst case scenario where every car using Mossland Street chooses to use southbound Elm and then back onto Somerville Ave here westbound. So while we think that's most likely, we do, envision that some people, especially those further away, are probably going to end up choosing a slightly different route. Maybe they'll go to Beach Street and continue on Mass Ave after all. Maybe some people will go further down Somerville Ave and use Park Street, say. But by and away, we think most people will choose this section. And so we've developed our solutions for how to retime the traffic lights based on sort of that worst case scenario where everyone does use this section. In reality, it probably won't be 100%, and we will see traffic kind of disperse a little bit, but we do envision that, somewhere between 80 and 98, 99% of those trips will end up using this little section here because it is the shortest out of the way. Um, so with our data analysis complete, we focused in on that triangle that I mentioned of Mossland, Somerville Ave, and Elm as the area that would require the most traffic mitigation. Our primary tool to accommodate the changes in traffic flow is to modify the traffic signals in the area. We want to visualize the data that we collected and lay out our resulting signal proposal for each of these intersections based on the anticipated future condition, starting with Elm at Cedar and Mossland. In the image on the left, you can see which you can see which turns cars are allowed to make today. The color represents the approach. So the shades of purple represent Elm Street eastbound, the shades of yellow represent Elm Street westbound, and the shades of orange represent Cedar Street southbound. The thicker the arrow, the more cars that make that movement per day. So you can see here that traffic continuing straight on Elm in either direction are the highest volume movements today. And in contrast, very few people make the left turn from Elm onto Mossland Street. The colors in the chart on the right correspond to the arrows on the left, and so the chart is showing how volumes fluctuate throughout the day. For example, you can see that the orange band representing traffic going straight on Cedar gets narrow as you go from left to right on the chart. This means that drivers make this move the most often in the morning when it's the highest, and that happens less in the evening hours. So it is a less common movement. There are fewer cars making it. The bands stacked together represent the overall volume. So you can see that the busiest times of day are from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. here, where over 700 cars travel through this intersection in that hour. And then from 5 to 6 p.m., where almost 800 vehicles travel through this intersection per hour. And on this slide, we're seeing the same graphic and chart, but with the anticipated volumes and traffic movements after Mossland Street becomes a dead end. You'll notice that the through movement from Cedar onto Mossland is no longer available, and our assumption is that anyone that would normally go straight from Cedar to Mossland will instead take a left. You can also see that the right turn from Elm onto Mossland is no longer available, and our assumption is that anyone that would normally take a right onto Mossland from Elm will instead go straight and continue eastbound on Elm. The left turn from Elm on Mossland onto Mossland isn't available either, and there's expected to be a slight uptick in westbound through traffic as a result. The overall traffic volume is expected to stay about the same as it is today, however. We're just going to see more lefts and more throughs, particularly from these two movements. But there's not going to be an increase in traffic. We're just going to be expecting people to change where they go. So then what does that actually mean in terms of how we make changes to the design? So we're going to walk through our traffic signal proposal for this intersection based on our design and based on our design proposal and the anticipated traffic volumes that we've talked about. On the whole, minimal changes are expected to be needed to signal timing and phasing here, since the overall volume isn't really going to change that much. So during the first phase, eastbound and westbound Elm Street bikes and vehicles will get the green. Pedestrians will also have the walk sign to cross across Cedar and across Mossland. In the second phase, the walk sign will come on for all of the crosswalks at the intersection. People on bikes will also be permitted to proceed after yielding to pedestrians. During the third phase, southbound bikes and vehicles will get the green to go as they're coming off of Cedar Street. Right turning drivers must yield to cyclists before making the turn, as shown by the dashed or dotted line here. That's what we call a permissive movement. And so they can make it, but only after checking to make sure that a bike isn't coming. Um, and pedestrians will also have the walk sign across Cedar and Mossland. So any cyclist proceeding onto Mossland must yield to any pedestrians in the crosswalk here. So bikes have the right of way over vehicles here, but they must proceed to any pedestrians in this crosswalk. So in terms of signal phasing, Elm, Cedar, and Mossland will work similar to the way it does today. Elm gets the green, then there's the all walk pedestrian phase, and then Cedar Street gets the green. The biggest benefit will be for pedestrians using the crosswalk across Mossland and cyclists traveling eastbound on Elm, who will be able to proceed through the intersection unimpeded, since cars will no longer be able to access Mossland from this intersection. Based on our traffic counts, we'll also be able to reduce the overall cycle length from 90 seconds to 70 seconds, meaning going from Elm to the PED phase to Cedar Street will be reduced by 20 seconds. So that should still provide enough time for any cars waiting at the light to get through on the next green, but will allow for a shorter wait for pedestrians and cyclists to get through the intersection. So it should be a benefit for everyone. Next, we'll move over to Elm at Somerville Ave, aka Wilson Square. In the diagram to the left, the shades of purple correspond to Elm Street southbound traffic. The shades of green represent Somerville Ave westbound, and the shades of blue represent Somerville Ave eastbound. You can see here that traffic continuing straight on Somerville Ave in either direction are the most popular movements. That the left turn off Elm is considerably more common than the right turn. You can see that darker purple is thicker than the lighter purple. And that there are also a lot of rights from Somerville Ave onto Elm. Note that the light green arrow does also include traffic that uses the slip lane. So someone either taking it off of Somerville Ave here or using the slip lane are both combined into this, the sort of the size of this arrow here. In the chart on the right, you'll notice that the evening rush hour is considerably busier here, with almost 1,000 vehicles using the intersection between 5 and 6 p.m. Compared to a little over 800 in the morning rush hour. And as far as what we anticipate after Mossland Street becomes a dead end, the biggest impact is that we assume anyone that would normally use Mossland is going to come down Elm and take a right onto Somerville Ave instead. This right turn from Elm Street onto Somerville Ave is expected to increase the overall traffic volume at this intersection from an average about 800 vehicles per hour, averaged across the day, to about 960 vehicles per hour. And you can see that the biggest crunch times, no surprise, are going to be during those morning and evening rush hours between 8 and 9 p.m. or sorry, 8 and 9 a.m. and 5 and 6 p.m. And the natural next question is, what are we going to do about that? So we will walk you through our traffic signal proposal for this intersection based on the design and anticipated traffic volumes. Our plan is going to change the setup of the traffic signals at this intersection in a way that's intended to give people walking, rolling, biking, and driving as much dedicated time and space to proceed as possible. During the first phase, westbound vehicles and bikes in both directions on Somerville Ave will get the green. Pedestrians will also have the walk sign across Elm, so any cyclist proceeding onto Elm must yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. All right turns from Somerville Ave onto Elm will be required to use the slip lane, as I noted earlier, so pedestrians and cyclists will not have to worry about cars turning right while they have the green or the walk sign. So these will be fully what we call protected movements. So cars will have the green, and so will bikes and pedestrians, but the car shouldn't be turning across anyone at this intersection. It's a protected movement. During the second phase, westbound vehicles and bikes will get the green onto Somerville Ave. Right turns from Elm onto Somerville Ave will also be permitted during this phase. This phase can be shortened if there isn't that much traffic heading eastbound onto Somerville Ave. So the length of the crosswalk often dictates how much time we can give to each of these phases. Since there are no crosswalks running during this phase, this one can be shortened if there just isn't that much traffic and we can move on to the next one. During the third phase, what we're calling Elm Street Right, right turns from Elm onto Somerville Ave will get a green arrow. Pedestrians will also have the walk sign to cross Somerville Ave on the east side of the intersection. And again, we can allow these cars to go while these pedestrians go because there's no conflict here, right? This is happening on the complete opposite side of the intersection and pedestrians. And so we can turn this on and allow both these to go without having to worry about any conflicts. We can also allow cyclists who want to take a left from Somerville Ave onto Elm to go at this time as well. These will be timed together, and what it will look like is you'll have the walk sign go. Let's say you're, kind of on the car wash corner here, and you're either waiting as a pedestrian or a bike. And there will be a bike signal next to that walk sign. The bike signal will go green, the walk sign will come on, and folks will be able to proceed. And that'll be about a 20-second phase. After that, in the fourth phase, all traffic on Elm will get a green. Cyclists heading eastbound on Somerville Ave will also be able to proceed. This is another phase that can be shortened that if there isn't that much traffic on Elm, because it isn't tied to any of these crosswalks. But we did want to add this one in because we know that we are anticipating sending more cars down Elm Street. And so this will just help clear out that traffic at the busiest times of day to allow the right and left to go at the same time. And then lastly, during the fifth phase, the Elm Street right turn lane will go red, but left turns from Elm Street onto Somerville Ave will still have the green. The walk sign across Somerville Ave on the west side of the intersection will then go on, and cyclists heading southbound on Elm will be able to take a left onto Somerville Ave. So kind of the opposite of phase three. We expect this plan to result in more predictability for everyone and allow everyone to feel safer as well. So we are trying to kind of have it both ways here and make it feel safer and move more people through the intersection. Despite the fact that we're anticipating more traffic at this intersection in the future condition, we do believe that this plan will move people through about as quickly as they do today and not have to compromise on safety. Based on our traffic counts, even including the anticipated volumes in the future, we believe the overall cycle length can stay about the same as it is today. So today it's about 2 minutes. We intend to keep it about 2 minutes. And that benefits everyone, reduces waiting times as long as you can continue to clear traffic. But really that benefit is most pronounced for pedestrians who won't have to wait longer than they do today. All right. And so I promise I'm almost done talking. I do just want to get to sort of the main part of the proposal here with you all and something that, as Kate mentioned, we heard from a lot of people on throughout our engagement process, which is the intersections of Somerville Ave at Mossland and at Beacon Street. So in the diagram on the left, the green represents Somerville Ave westbound at Mossland. The blue represents Somerville Ave eastbound at Mossland. And the shades of orange represent Mossland Street southbound traffic. So here, the through movements on Somerville Ave are clearly, those arrows are much thicker. Those are the most common movements. And you can see, which I also talked about earlier, in terms of the proportion of people taking a right off of Mossland versus left. The left is way, way heavier. So I think it's something like for every 20 cars that turn left, there's one car that turns right. It's like, well over 90%. The morning peak hour is the busiest time of day here, with an average of about 850 vehicles passing through this intersection between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. In the future dead-end condition of Mossland Street, we obviously expect things to look quite different here. We don't anticipate that volumes on Somerville Ave will change much, but we are anticipating that Mossland will go from an average of just shy of 200 cars per hour during the day to maybe 20. And I think that's on the high end. So since it will also become a two-way excuse me, we are anticipating that a few vehicles per hour will want to take a left or a right onto Mossland Street from Somerville Ave. And that is not currently permitted today. So we have accounted for that in our traffic modeling and our signal analysis. But because there are only going to be a handful of folks that want to access Mossland Street in the future, because it'll just be folks that live there or visiting, we anticipate those movements to be very, very low, and not something that we have to make a substantial amount of accommodations for. All right. I also want to talk through briefly the existing anticipated volumes on Somerville Ave at Beacon. Um, so quick orientation, green still represents, shades of green represent Somerville Ave westbound, blue still represents Somerville Ave eastbound, the purple represents Beacon, and then we have a yellow here for Adelaide Road. You can see that the heaviest movement today is the right turn from Somerville Ave onto Beacon Street, and much of that traffic is coming from Mossland. Again, as we explained in our Mossland Street analysis earlier, many of the other movements are actually fairly similar with each turn off Beacon, the Somerville Ave through movement in each direction, and the left turn from Somerville Ave onto Beacon, all carrying an average of between 100 and 170 cars per hour. Also note that traffic into or out of Adelaide Road is so low that those movements don't actually even show up on the volume chart on the right. You might be able to make out a couple of small slivers at certain times of day where Adelaide Road does show up, either someone turning in or out, but those are very, very small compared to all the other changes. And that's probably about what we expect Mossland Street to look like after this project is implemented. As far as changes to traffic throughout the day go, the morning peak hour is actually the busiest time of day here with over 1,200 vehicles passing through this intersection between 8 and 9. It's also worth pointing out that even during a less busy time of day, such as say 10 or 11 a.m., this intersection is still processing about the same amount of traffic as the busiest time of day over at the Wilson Square intersection. So we do know that an intersection of this size can handle upwards of 1,200 cars, or over 1,000, which is what we are anticipating Wilson Square will have after Mossland Street becomes a dead end. All right, so in terms of the anticipated volumes after the Mossland Street change, we're assuming that anyone that would normally use Mossland is going to come down from Somerville Ave and take that left onto Beacon. As we've noted, that the right turn from Somerville Ave onto Beacon is going to decrease by the same amount as the other turn is increasing, since the Mossland to Beacon move will now be happening from the east side of the intersection instead of the west. So this light blue right turn arrow goes down quite a bit as compared to the current condition, and that left turn does increase by basically the same amount. So we're expecting the number of vehicles using this intersection to stay about the same. It is just going to change where those cars are coming from is expected to change. Um, And here we're just showing the anticipated traffic at the two intersections together, noting again that we anticipate an overall decrease in the amount of traffic at the Mossland Street intersection, and a similar amount of traffic at the Beacon Street intersection, albeit with a heavier westbound left turn and a lighter eastbound right turn off Somerville Ave. All right, so sorry. The last thing I want to go over with you all before turning it over to Lily is the traffic signal proposal for, essentially what we're considering one intersection, but in the area of Somerville Ave at Beacon and Mossland. Our plan will change the setup at the traffic signals again in a way that's intended to give people walking, rolling, biking, and driving as much dedicated time and space to proceed as possible. So we want to, make sure that people feel safe, feel comfortable, and are still able to get through in a timely and efficient manner. During the first phase, the left turn from Somerville Ave onto Beacon Street and the right turn from Beacon onto Somerville Ave eastbound will both be green for drivers, as seen here. Cyclists will also be able to turn from Somerville Ave heading westbound onto Beacon and from Somerville Ave heading eastbound onto Mossland. So those left turns shown in purple here. The crosswalks across Somerville Ave at Mossland and on the west side of Beacon will have the walk sign as well. And in the morning, you can see that will be, we're showing a 40-second phase here. During the second phase, drivers proceeding straight along Somerville Ave in either direction will have the green. Drivers will also be permitted to turn onto Mawson Street or Adelaide Road during this phase after yielding to oncoming traffic, cyclists, and pedestrians. Again, these are Mawson Street is new. That does not exist today because Mawson Street's one-way southbound. But we really don't anticipate that having a major overall traffic impact because the volumes to both of these streets are so low. Um, Cyclists will also be able to proceed straight in either direction along Somerville Ave and can turn right onto Beacon, Mossland, or Adelaide after yielding to pedestrians. And then pedestrians will have the walk sign for the crosswalk across Beacon. In the third phase, cyclists and drivers waiting at either Mossland or Adelaide will both get the green. Anyone taking a right out of Adelaide or a left out of Mossland will have a red light in the middle section here of Somerville Ave on the start of the next phase. Obviously, we couldn't have this be green or people coming, out of Mossland, continuing out of Mossland here and coming southbound on Adelaide. That would be a conflict. We can't have that. Same thing with allowing a car to, continue on Somerville Ave after coming out of Adelaide and then having a car or a bike coming out of Mossland. Can't have that either. So they will be able to kind of enter the intersection, but we'll have a red light in the middle here. Then they'll be able to proceed at the start of the next phase. We do intend to install camera detection at these intersections, and that'll allow this phase to be skipped if there aren't any cars or bikes waiting to exit Mossland or Adelaide and save us a little bit of time and keep on moving to the next phase. So in that fourth phase, drivers turning left from Beacon onto Somerville Ave or right from Somerville Ave onto Beacon will then get a green. Traffic bound for Adelaide Road from Beacon will also be permitted to proceed through the intersection, only after yielding to cyclists who will be sort of coming off of Beacon and will be allowed to sort of take that left onto Somerville Ave heading westbound and up Mossland Street if they choose, or to continue on into Porter Square. Cyclists will also have a green on Somerville Ave heading eastbound, which is primarily intended to allow cyclists wishing to turn left onto Mossland to position themselves to proceed during the next phase. So when you go back to phase one, you then have this the ability to make that turn there. So it'll be red here, will be green at this light for cyclists. Pedestrians will also have the walk sign across Somerville Ave on the east side of Beacon and the crosswalk across Mossland. So again, similar to Wilson Square, we expect this plan to result in more predictability and everyone feeling safer. We intend to keep the cycle length the same as it is today to ensure that pedestrians don't have to wait any longer, but do also believe that this cycle length will allow people driving, and this phasing plan will allow people driving and biking to be able to move quickly through these intersections, hopefully more quickly than they do today without compromising on safety. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lily to talk about our parking findings and mitigation plan.
Thanks so much, Adam. So I'll talk a little bit more about the parking and curbside regulations portion of our concept design. Broadly, in order to fit separated bike lanes and also include bus stop changes and safer crosswalks, about half of the parking spaces on Elm will need to be removed. There will be a few minor changes in other parts of the project area, but the bulk of the changes will occur on Elm. The maps on this slide show a sample section of Elm Street to illustrate the changes in parking and in curbside regulations. As shown on the map, for the most part, there will be no parking on the south side of Elm, and parking will remain on the north side. We have published a full map of these proposed regulations for all of the streets in the project area on our project website. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about what went into this proposal and what we heard from the community. So during our first round of community engagement in the fall, we heard a variety of input about parking from the community via surveys, via some of our in-person events, or also direct contact with our project team. We also reached out separately to each individual business so we could really connect with them about their parking, loading, and delivery needs. We heard from residents who were concerned about parking loss in general, as well as we heard some requests for short-term parking and loading to support both residential and commercial delivery needs. Many people also shared particular traffic and parking challenges around the Kennedy School, particularly during arrival and dismissal. We did also hear from residents who expressed that they did not have trouble finding residential parking in this area and who did not have concerns about the parking changes that we would be making as part of this proposal. So we collected all of that feedback and really systematically went through it to make sure that we were understanding the parking and curbside needs for the people who live around Elm Street and use Elm Street so that we could figure out how to propose changes and to tailor parking regulations accordingly. So to address parking needs near high demand areas, such as the many small businesses along Elm, we proposed adding more short-term spaces, particularly up near Davis Square where the demand is highest. In our proposal, we're actually able to increase the number of spaces near Davis rather than simply changing the regulations of existing spaces. We also propose to add spaces on Somerville Ave and alter the layout on that section of Somerville Ave such that the parking spaces are closer to residences to make it easier for folks who live there. On Elm Street itself, we prioritize keeping parking next to key destinations. And we also propose to add loading zones in areas with a lot of pickup and drop-off activity. To address the challenges at the Kennedy School, we propose expanding the pickup and drop-off areas adjacent to the school, so including some additional space on Cherry Street and Sartwell Ave, which will be in effect during school hours only to help give a little bit more space for that pickup and drop-off activity. Most importantly, as we move through this process, we can continue to iterate and make changes to the curbside regulations to better adapt to the community needs. So there's always room for feedback and for improvement. So as we developed the concept design, we took an inventory of the existing parking spaces in the area, and we wanted to be really clear about what was changing. The table on this slide shows the approximate number of spaces changing on Elm Street, on Somerville Ave, and overall in the entire project area, which includes some of the other streets. So on Elm Street, 93 spaces will be removed, which is about half of the existing number. Our Somerville Ave proposal will actually add spaces overall, and due to the addition of the new spaces on Somerville Ave, as well as Russell Street, Cutter Ave, and a couple on Mossland, the total parking loss over the entire project area is 76 spaces, which is about 32%. And a key part of doing all of this work was conducting a parking study this fall to help count the existing number of spaces, but also to measure the parking occupancy in the area to figure out how many cars are actually parked here. We included the streets in the project area, as well as the Somerville side streets that intersect Elm Street up to 300 feet from Elm to really kind of capture the people who might be parking in the area, but not exactly on Elm or the other streets in our project area. We wanted to sort of capture what's available in a short walking distance. So we didn't include the streets on the south side of Elm that are in the city of Cambridge because those are not available for Somerville folks to park on if they have resident permits. We did multiple nighttime counts between 10 p.m. and midnight to capture the overnight, primarily residential parking use, which tends to be when there is the highest demand for parking, but we also counted daytime occupancy. On a typical weeknight, between 50 and 63 parking spaces were available on Elm Street alone. And if you look at the overall project area, between 188 and 201 spaces were available. One count was taken on a night when half of the available parking on Elm Street was not available due to street cleaning restrictions, which is a good approximation for the future condition where only one side of parking will remain. The results of that count are pictured on this slide in the occupancy map here. So it kind of shows just a bit of a heat map of which streets are more heavily parked up and which streets are not. On street cleaning night, we found 22 spaces free on Elm Street alone and 109 spaces free in the wider neighborhood. So we anticipate that even with parking on only one side of Elm for our future condition and our proposed design, there will still be sufficient availability in the wider area to accommodate demand. And with that, I'll talk a little bit more about what is next for this project and how you can engage. So just a little walk through our anticipated timeline. Now that we've published the concept design, we'll be collecting feedback from community members until about mid-April. We will then work to incorporate that feedback in developing the final design over the summer. Our aim is to reach final design by the fall and then share that back out to the community, taking into account what's going to happen for the final design and what changes we made since the concept design phase. We are now anticipating implementation to take place either in late fall 2025 or in spring summer 2026 due to two major reasons. Number one, we took a little bit more time during this concept design phase to really make sure that we did the traffic analysis and understood the impacts of dead-ending Mossland Street so that we could develop strategies that wouldn't create traffic problems elsewhere. And we wanted to make sure we had a good plan for emergency response. We also, so reason number two, we were initially aiming to use funding through our U.S. Department of Transportation's Safe Streets for All grant. And with the federal funding picture becoming a bit more uncertain in the last few months, we've been doing some scenario planning just in case we no longer have access to that resource. So we have a little more info here about how to share your feedback on the concept design. We have a concept design feedback survey, which is out and it's available in multiple languages. Our deadline for survey submissions is April 11th. If you're interested, you can also attend our virtual office hour on March 19th from 5:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Community members can join anytime during the hour to ask questions or share feedback directly to the project team. Registration details are found on our project webpage. We also have a street outreach pop-up planned for Wednesday, April 2nd from 4:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. And that will be right on Elm Street across from the Porter Square Shopping Center. If the weather forecast ends up looking bad, we will announce a new date about 24 hours in advance, also on our project website. And at any time, you can write to us at transportation@somervillema.gov. If you would like a callback, you can submit a request by calling 311. And all of our project details, again, are available at our project website, www.somervillema.gov/Elm-Beacon. And then lastly, a couple other ways to stay informed in general. You can subscribe to our Mobility Division monthly newsletter, which is also available on our project website. You can ask to be added to our direct email list for this project. You can subscribe to city alerts or also follow the city on social media channels. And finally, thank you so much for engaging with this project and working with us as we work to create safer streets in Somerville.